Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Day in History, our nightly look back at a specific day in history, where we take a look back at the events of a day, the historic context in which those events took place, and the historic ramifications of those events. We also take a look at some people that were born and some people that died. As always, if you have not yet, please hit the subscribe button, the bell notification icon to be alerted anytime I post new content, and tell a friend. And without any further ado, this day in history, April the 23rd. And on this day in 1985, Coke changed its formula and introduced New Coke. Now, initially, the formula had been tested in some U.S. markets and been met with some success. Coke pushed it out there, and the response was very, very negative. Coke was flooded with complaints and outrage from customers. And 79 days later, the company announced it was reintroducing the classic formula. This was cause for ABC News to interrupt General Hospital, a U.S. senator to say on the floor of the U.S. Senate, this is a groundbreaking day in U.S. history, and calls for celebration. This is how for years, when you would drink a can of Coca-Cola, it would say Coke Classic. They would drop that moniker in the turn of the 21st century and adopt the now original Coke taste moniker that you see on Coca-Cola. This is one of the biggest marketing flops in history. Coke insists that it was not a marketing ploy to boost sales of Coke, which was struggling at the time, and that this was a genuine attempt to try something new. And as I said, it's one of the biggest marketing failures in history, and thankfully, I was not around to experience it. As a Coke fan and a Coke connoisseur myself, I would find it difficult to swallow this new Coke abomination. So, thank God those other people flooded the lines with their disbelief. Births that occurred on this day. In 1897, in Toronto, Canada, Lester Pearson was born. Pearson was Prime Minister of Canada from 1963 to 1968. He headed two Liberal minority governments. During his time as Prime Minister, he introduced universal health care, student loans, and the maple leaf flag. Yes, children, there was a flag of Canada before the maple leaf that looked different. It had the Union Jack insignia in the left-hand corner of it. It was a red flag, and with the coat of arms of Canada in it as well. That pre-maple leaf flag, from the understanding I have done, has become quite a controversial piece in Canada, as it has been co-opted, and the history behind it has really been stolen by white nationalists in Canada to promote their ideology of hate and division. So, just a note on the pre-maple leaf flag that I discovered. He won the Nobel Prize prior to becoming Prime Minister in 1957 for helping the United Nations solve the Suez Canal crisis. He was the ambassador to the United Nations from Canada at the time. He is considered to be one of Canada's greatest prime ministers by many academics and historians that study the office of the Canadian Prime Minister. He was succeeded as Prime Minister. He retired, as I said, in 1968 by Pierre Trudeau, who would go on to serve a long stint as Prime Minister. He would actually have 2 stints as Prime Minister. And of course, he would be the father of the current Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. And Mr. Pierre Trudeau is the most recent Canadian Prime Minister to pass away, and that was in the year 2000. Lester Pearson. Mr. Pearson passed away shortly after retiring from the prime ministership in the 70s. Some deaths that occurred on this day. In 1951, Charles Dawes died at the age of 85 in Evanston, Illinois. Mr. Dawes held many posts in his life throughout government, but the most prominent was that of the office of Vice President of the United States from 1925 until 1929. He was Vice President for President Coolidge. And he and Mr. Coolidge did not have a good relationship. Boy, howdy. So, on March the 10th, 1925, just a few days into his vice presidential reign, the Senate was debating the nomination of Charles Warren to be United States Attorney General. And the Senate Majority Leader and Minority Leader both assured Mr. Dawes that there would be no votes until at least that afternoon. And that there were several more speakers that were going to speak out against the nomination of Dawes on the floor. So, against Mr. Warren. So Mr. Dawes retired to the Willard Hotel for a nap. Well, during that time a vote was taken, and it was 40-40. And while they were wrangling Dawes up to get up to the Capitol to break the tie, one Democratic senator who had voted yes, switched his vote, and the nomination failed, 41-39. It was the first rejection of a presidential nominee in 60 years. And it led to a falling out, obviously, between Mr. Dawes and Mr. Coolidge. In fact, it was such a sour relationship that Hoover had considered in 1928 renominating Dawes to be vice president, and Dawes would have obviously been elected vice president under Hoover as well. Mr. Coolidge let it be known that he was absolutely positively opposed to this move. And as such, this is how Charles Curtis made his way onto the ticket. Dawes would go on to serve in the Hoover administration as the ambassador to the United Kingdom, the Court of St. James. He would also serve as a Depression-era head of an agency, and would try to wiggle his way onto the ticket in 1932, but that was also shot down. So, as I've said many times when covering the vice presidents on this little jaunt we go through, they are mostly forgotten, but almost all of them have something interesting they have done. And Mr. Dawes falling asleep and not getting back to the Capitol in time is his story. causing the Attorney General nomination to fail. Boy, when you mess up big, you mess up big as vice president. So I will see you all another tomorrow. Have a great night. See you then.